750,000 people left California last year, not in some gradual drift, not slowly over a decade. Last year, 12 months. New York lost almost 400,000. Illinois lost another 140,000. And the numbers keep climbing every single quarter. Now here is the part that does not make the headlines. Here is what the real estate blogs and the news cycles consistently leave out. Most of those people do not regret it. According to a study by Redfin, 83% of people who relocated in the last 3 years say their financial situation improved, not slightly, not marginally, meaningfully. The kind of improvement that changes what your savings account looks like at the end of the year. The kind of improvement that changes what retirement looks like. The kind of improvement that changes whether you can afford to send your kids to college without going into debt. So the question has already been answered. People are leaving. That part is settled. The question that nobody is answering well right now is, where are they actually going? And more importantly, should you be going there too? Because not every destination is the same. Some of the most popular places people are moving to right now are already getting expensive in ways that are going to surprise a lot of people who are just arriving. And some of the best opportunities, and the ones the data keeps pointing to, the ones where the financial case is still genuinely compelling, almost nobody is talking about them at the level they deserve. That is what this channel is for. And that is what today is about. But before we get into the data, I need to tell you about Marcus, because his story is the reason all of this analysis matters in the first place, and because understanding what Marcus did and why it worked is the foundation for every decision we are going to walk through today. Here is how the next hour is going to work. First, we are going to look at why people are really leaving expensive cities. And I mean really. Not the surface version, not the rent went up and people left narrative. The actual structural drivers, the ones that have been building for a decade and that are not going to reverse. Understanding them is what helps you make a smarter decision about your own situation, regardless of whether you are a renter, a buyer, or someone thinking about their first investment property. Then we are going to go through the official migration data, the IRS data, the Census Bureau data, the LinkedIn workforce data, the Redfin search patterns. We are going to tell you where Americans are actually moving, not where the real estate blogs say they are moving, not where the top 10 lists point, but where the money is actually flowing according to the most reliable data sets we have. After that, we are going to introduce a framework that we are going to use on this channel every single time we analyze a market. We call it the 3 tiers. And once you understand it, you will never look at a relocation recommendation the same way again. It is the difference between making a Marcus-level move and making a Jennifer-level move. And we will talk about Jennifer too, because her story is just as important, maybe more important, than Marcus's. Then we are going to go into the 5 signals. The early warning indicators that consistently show up in the data 18 to 36 months before a city experiences a migration wave and a corresponding price appreciation cycle. These are the signals that pointed to Raleigh in 2017, to Nashville in 2016, to Austin in 2018, and right now, in early 2025, 3 specific cities are scoring high on all 5 signals simultaneously. We are going to name them. And we are going to finish with what all of this means for you specifically. Not a vague, it depends answer. A direct, segmented recommendation based on whether you are renting, buying, or investing. The people who watch this whole video leave with a framework they will use for the rest of their financial lives. That is the promise. Let us start with Marcus. Marcus was 36 years old. He was working as a senior software engineer at a mid-sized tech company in San Francisco. His salary was $158,000 a year. Most people outside of San Francisco hear that number and think he is set. He is doing well. He has figured it out. Here is what $158,000 actually looked like for Marcus in San Francisco in 2022. After California state income tax, which has one of the highest marginal rates in the country, and after federal taxes, Marcus took home approximately $8,580 a month. His rent for a one-bedroom apartment in the Mission District was $3,400 a month. That is nearly 40% of his take-home income, gone before he bought a single grocery item, before he paid for his phone, before he put gas in his car. His car insurance in San Francisco was $220 a month. Parking, because he could not find street parking consistently near his building, was another $180. Groceries for one person, eating reasonably but not extravagantly, ran about $600 a month in San Francisco. That is not expensive restaurants. That is just cooking at home with the cost of food in that city. Utilities, internet, his phone, a gym membership, and the occasional dinner out with friends brought his monthly spending to somewhere around $6,500. That left him with roughly $2,000 at the end of the month. On a $158,000 salary, in one of the wealthiest cities in the world. $2,000 a month in savings sounds like something until you think about what Marcus actually wanted to do with his financial life. He wanted to own a home eventually. He wanted to build something. He wanted the kind of financial security where an unexpected expense does not derail everything. At $2,000 a month in savings, a 20% down payment on even the cheapest homes in San Francisco, which were running around $900,000 for a modest two-bedroom condo in 2022, would take him approximately 75 years to save for. And it was not just the money. It was what the money was not buying. His company went fully remote in 2021. He was working from a one-bedroom apartment he could barely afford, in a building with thin walls and a noisy street, commuting to a physical office that no longer existed, in a city he felt he was paying for but not truly experiencing. He was surviving San Francisco. He was not living it. He started looking at numbers, not blog posts, not recommendations from real estate agents with a vested interest, not top 10 lists, actual numbers. He pulled the cost of living calculators. He spent weeks on Zillow looking at what the same salary would buy in different markets. He ran the tax comparison between California and North Carolina. He spent 3 months building a spreadsheet that compared San Francisco against 8 other cities on every financial dimension he could quantify. And in March of 2022, Marcus moved to Raleigh, North Carolina. Here is what the same income looks like in Raleigh. North Carolina has a flat income tax rate of 4.5% as of 2023, compared to California's top marginal rate of 13.3%. After federal and state taxes, Marcus's take-home in Raleigh is approximately $9,330 a month. That is $750 more per month before he changes a single spending habit, just from the tax difference alone. His mortgage, a 3-bedroom house with a backyard, a 2-car garage, and a quiet street 12 minutes from downtown Raleigh, is $2,100 a month. That mortgage is $1,300 less per month than his San Francisco one-bedroom rental. Think about that for a moment. He went from renting a 1-bedroom to owning a 3-bedroom, and his monthly housing cost went down by $1,300. His car insurance dropped from $220 to $110. Groceries run about $400 a month now, not $600. His total monthly expenses, living a meaningfully better life in a larger home in a calmer city with a yard and space, are about $4,200 a month. Marcus is saving $4,800 a month now. That is $57,600 a year, on the exact same salary he had in San Francisco, where he was saving $24,000 a year if everything went perfectly. He did not get a promotion. He did not start a business. He did not win anything. He moved. And the financial outcome of that move is the difference between building real wealth and running in place. 2 years after moving to Raleigh, Marcus used his accumulated savings to buy a duplex. He lives in one unit and rents out the other. The rental income covers $1,100 of his monthly mortgage. His effective housing cost is now $1,000 a month. He is 38 years old, owns a duplex in a growing city, has a fully funded emergency reserve, and is building a real estate portfolio. Because he moved. That is the story this channel is about. Not the move itself, the math behind the move. the decision framework that separates the people who make a Marcus-level financial transformation from the people who keep waiting for the right moment in an expensive city while the math works against them every single month. Now, Raleigh worked for Marcus, but Raleigh is not the answer for everyone, and in some important ways, Raleigh in 2025 is a very different market than Raleigh in 2022. We will get to that. But first, we need to understand why people are leaving expensive cities in numbers we have not seen since the 1970s. Because the reasons matter. They tell you something important about whether the trend continues, and they tell you something important about which cities are actually positioned to receive the next wave of migration. The media version of this story is simple. Rent went up, people left. That is accurate, but it is dangerously incomplete. The parts it misses are actually what matter most for deciding where to go next. There are 4 drivers, and they compound. Understanding all 4 is the difference between seeing a trend and understanding a structural shift. Driver number 1 is what we call the rent-to-income collapse. Between 2019 and 2024, median rents in San Francisco went up 34%. In New York, they went up 28%. In Los Angeles, 31%. Wages in those same cities went up an average of 18% over the same period. Do that math. Rent went up almost twice as fast as income. The gap between what people earn and what they pay to live got structurally wider. And this was not a one-year spike caused by some temporary supply shortage. It has been 5 years of compression. 5 years of the math getting harder every single month you stay. For a household earning $120,000 in Los Angeles, which sounds like a comfortable income until you actually live in Los Angeles, the math changed completely between 2019 and today. The same apartment now takes 43% of their take-home income instead of 33%. That 10 percentage point difference is $12,000 a year that used to build savings and now just covers the rent increase. $12,000 that used to go toward a down payment, toward retirement accounts, toward an emergency fund, toward anything, gone, every year, just to stay in the same place. And the compounding effect is brutal. When rent consumes a larger share of your income, you have less to invest. When you have less to invest, your net worth grows more slowly. When your net worth grows more slowly, you fall further behind people who moved and whose housing costs stopped growing at the same pace. The longer you stay, the harder it gets to leave. Because leaving requires a deposit on a new place, moving costs, the financial friction of transition, and the city has been slowly depleting the reserves you would need to make that transition. Driver number 2 is what we call the property ownership impossibility, and this one is more brutal than it looks on the surface, because it is not just a financial problem, it is a psychological and motivational one. The median home price in San Francisco, as of early 2025, is approximately $1.2 million. At today's interest rates, which are hovering around 6.5% for a 30-year fixed mortgage, a 20% down payment on that median home is $240,000. The monthly mortgage payment on the remaining $960,000 is $6,070. That is just principal and interest. Add property taxes in San Francisco, which run roughly 1.2% of assessed value annually, add homeowners insurance, and you are looking at a total monthly housing cost of approximately $7,200 for a median home. To qualify for that mortgage under conventional lending standards, you need to demonstrate a household income of approximately $240,000 per year. The median household income in San Francisco is $136,000. This is not a housing problem in the traditional sense, where prices are high but attainable with effort and patience. This is a mathematical impossibility for the majority of people who live there. For roughly 60% of San Francisco residents, buying a median home in the city they live in is simply not possible at current prices and current rates, regardless of how long they save or how carefully they budget. And when homeownership becomes structurally impossible, something shifts psychologically. People stop thinking of a city as a place to build a life. They stop putting down roots. They stop feeling invested in the neighborhood, in the school district, among in the long-term trajectory of the community. They start thinking of it as a place they are passing through, a temporary situation, and then, when the opportunity presents itself, they leave. Not dramatically, not with some grand announcement. They just quietly put in the address change form and drive the moving truck out. Driver number 3 is remote work, and this one permanently changed the calculus for somewhere between 20 and 30 million American workers. Before 2020, you had to be in a specific place to do many high-paying jobs. That constraint, the geographic requirement, was the economic foundation of expensive city premiums. You paid the premium because you had to be there. The job was there, the clients were there, the professional network was there, the opportunity was there, and only there. That was the deal, and it was understandable. That constraint no longer exists for approximately 22 million American workers, and that number is not shrinking. According to LinkedIn's 2024 workforce report, 22% of all job postings on their platform are now fully remote. In technology and finance, the two industries that drive the economies of the most expensive cities in America, that number is 35%. It's more than 1 in 3 jobs in tech and finance can be done from anywhere. When the reason to stay, which was proximity to your job and your professional ecosystem, disappears, the reason to leave, which is everything we have just talked about, becomes the only calculation left. And that calculation is not close. It is not a trade-off. It is a mathematical case for leaving that grows stronger every month. The remote work option remains available. Here is the important nuance, though. Remote work did not create this migration wave. It enabled it. And the financial pressure was already there. The home ownership impossibility was already there. The rent-to-income compression was already there. Remote work simply removed the last constraint that was holding people in expensive cities despite those pressures. It was the unlocking mechanism for a migration that the economics had been building toward for years. Driver number 4 is the divergence of quality of life from cost of life. And this is the one that does not get enough attention, partly because it is harder to quantify, and partly because it requires acknowledging something uncomfortable about some of America's most celebrated cities. The most expensive cities in America are no longer delivering the quality of life premium they used to. School quality in many urban districts declined meaningfully during and after the pandemic, and the recovery has been uneven. In the Los Angeles Unified School District, third-grade reading proficiency is currently below 40%. In many Chicago public schools, the numbers are similar. Parents who are paying $4,000 to $5,000 a month in rent or mortgage for a home in a neighborhood with a theoretically good school are finding that the education their children receive does not match the premium they are paying for proximity to it. Public safety perception, regardless of what the actual statistics say in any given year, has deteriorated in the major expensive cities in ways that measurably affect quality of life. Whether or not crime is statistically higher than it was 15 years ago, the perception of safety is lower, and perception shapes behavior. People who feel unsafe in their neighborhood change how they live. They walk less. They use public spaces less. They drive more. Their daily life becomes more constrained and more expensive. Traffic in every major expensive city got materially worse between 2021 and 2024, as hybrid work patterns returned workers to the road in waves rather than in the predictable patterns that public transit and road infrastructure are designed around. The average commute in Los Angeles reached 47 minutes each way in 2024. In New York, including transit delays, the average daily commute time is now 52 minutes each way. That is 104 minutes a day, 860 hours a year, 36 full days of your life every year, sitting in traffic or on delayed transit. Meanwhile, a specific set of mid-size American cities has been investing heavily in walkable downtown districts, new parks and green spaces, culinary scenes that 10 years ago existed only in the largest metros, quality public infrastructure, and community programming. The quality of life gap between a city like Nashville or Raleigh or Greenville, South Carolina, and a city like San Francisco or Chicago or New York has narrowed dramatically, not eliminated, but narrowed, as while the cost gap has widened. When the cost goes up and the quality comes down, When the math stops working and the lifestyle stops delivering what it used to promise, the equilibrium breaks. People leave. And that is what we are watching happen, at scale, in real time, in the migration data right now. Now let me tell you about Jennifer. Because her story is different from Marcus's, and it is actually more common, and it is the story that contains the most important warning in this entire analysis. Jennifer was 41 years old. She was a marketing director at a healthcare company in New York City, earning $118,000 a year. She had 2 children, 9 and 12 years old. She was paying $4,200 a month for a 3-bedroom apartment in Park Slope, Brooklyn. Good school district, safe neighborhood, convenient to everything, expensive as everything. Her company offered permanent hybrid work in early 2022. 2 days in New York, 3 days from wherever she chose. She looked at the numbers and she looked at her life, and she decided to move to Asheville, North Carolina. She had visited twice before. She had loved it both times. The mountains, the food scene, the slower, more human pace of daily life, the creative community, the sense that the city was built for people to actually live in, not just to work in and survive in. She built a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet said the move made overwhelming financial sense. She could buy a 3-bedroom house in Asheville for somewhere around $350,000. Her mortgage would be around $1,900 a month. Her total monthly housing cost would be less than half what she was paying in Brooklyn. She would save, by her calculation, over $2,000 a month. Her children would have a yard. She would have a kitchen worth cooking in. She would have the mountains 20 minutes from her front door. She moved in August of 2022. And here is what the spreadsheet did not tell her. Asheville's housing market had already been discovered by the time Jennifer arrived. The Asheville that she had visited in 2019 and the Asheville she moved to in 2022 were 2 different cities in terms of price and in terms of competition for housing. The median home price in Asheville had gone up 47% between 2019 and 2022. By the time Jennifer was searching for a home, that $350,000 house she had been planning for was now selling for $510,000 when it was available at all, which it frequently was not because inventory was tight and there were multiple offers on anything desirable within hours of listing. She could not buy at the prices she had planned for. She rented instead. $2,800 a month for a 3-bedroom house she had found after 3 months of searching. That was $1,100 less than her Brooklyn apartment, which was meaningful but not the transformation she had planned for. And the dynamic she had not fully anticipated was that Asheville was simultaneously getting more expensive because of the migration wave she was now part of, while also becoming more crowded, more trafficked, and less of the quiet mountain city she had visited and fallen in love with. The lifestyle was still better than New York in meaningful ways. Her children loved it. She loved the mountains. But the financial math was significantly less transformative than her spreadsheet had suggested, because her spreadsheet had used 2021 prices in a 2022 market. She does not regret the move. She would tell you clearly that her quality of life improved. But she would also tell you that if she had done this in 2020 instead of 2022, the financial outcome would have been radically different. She would tell you that the window she had been looking at had already partially closed. She arrived at the party after much of the value had already been captured by the people who got there earlier. And that insight, the difference between where people are going and where the financial opportunity actually still exists, the difference between a city that is being discovered and a city that has already been discovered, is what separates a good move from a great one. It is the most important distinction in domestic migration analysis right now. And it is the one that the popular media consistently fails to make, because top 10 lists do not have time horizons, and spreadsheets do not update themselves. Let us look at what the actual official data says about where Americans are moving, because the data tells a more nuanced and more interesting story than the popular narrative. Every year, the Internal Revenue Service publishes migration data derived from comparing the address on individual tax returns from one year to the next. When a filer moves from a California address to a Texas address between year 1 and year 2, that shows up as an outflow from California and an inflow to Texas. This is the most comprehensive migration dataset in existence. It captures essentially everyone with taxable income, and it goes down to the county level. But almost nobody actually reads it. The blogs summarize it selectively. The top 10 lists cherry-pick from it. But the full picture is more complicated and more useful. The Census Bureau publishes independent annual migration estimates based on its American Community Survey. LinkedIn publishes quarterly workforce migration reports based on where their users change the location on their profiles. Redfin publishes monthly data on where users searching on their platform are located when they search in a given market. Put all of these sources together, and you get something much closer to the real picture than any single source provides. Here is what it actually says for 2023 to 2024. Florida is the #1 destination state for domestic migration. It has been for 3 consecutive years. Net inflow to Florida last year was approximately 335,000 people. But here is the important internal Florida story. The migration is not going to Miami the way people assume. Miami has gotten expensive. Miami Beach median home prices crossed $1 million in 2023. The Brickell and Wynwood neighborhoods that attracted the initial wave of remote workers and financial sector relocators are now priced at a level that does not make the arbitrage math work for most people, coming from even expensive cities. The migration within Florida is moving to the Tampa Bay corridor, to the southwest Florida markets like Fort Myers and Cape Coral, and to the smaller Gulf Coast cities that still have the Florida lifestyle at something closer to attainable prices. And those markets are now entering their own price appreciation cycles. Texas is the #2 destination state, net inflow of approximately 260,000 people. But crucially, the migration is not going to Austin anymore at the rate it was going to Austin in 2020 and 2021. Austin got expensive. The median home price in Austin peaked at over $500,000, and even with the correction, it came down to around $450,000, which is still expensive for Texas wages. The migration within Texas has moved to the Dallas suburbs, Frisco, McKinney, Allen, Prosper, cities north and northeast of Dallas that have strong school districts, newer housing stock, lower property taxes than Travis County, and prices that are still in a range where the math works for someone moving from a high-cost market. San Antonio and the Woodlands north of Houston are also absorbing significant inflows. North Carolina is the #3 destination state. Raleigh and Charlotte are the headliners. But the data shows meaningful inflows into smaller markets as well. Wilmington, on the coast, is absorbing retirees and semi-remote workers. The Triad, Greensboro, Winston-Salem, and High Point is receiving migration from people priced out of Raleigh and Charlotte. And there is quiet early-stage migration building in Fayetteville and in the smaller college-adjacent cities in the western part of the state. After those 3, the significant destination states in order are South Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, Arizona, Idaho, Nevada, and then the one that consistently surprises people when they see the actual data, Ohio. Net migration into Ohio in 2023 was 82,000 people. The overwhelming majority of that went to Columbus and to the Cincinnati metropolitan area. Columbus in particular is absorbing significant inflows from Chicago, from the Detroit metro, and from the Northeast. It has a major university, a diversifying tech and finance job market, a downtown that has been genuinely revitalized, and housing prices that are still in a range where home ownership is attainable on a median professional income. Ohio as a migration destination is not the narrative people expect. It does not match the Sunbelt story that dominates the popular media. But the data keeps showing it, and there is a reason for that which we will get into when we talk about the 3rd tier. Now let us talk about the framework that changes how you think about all of this information. The 3-tier framework emerged from looking at migration data over multiple cycles. When you study the patterns, the cities that have received major migration waves consistently go through 3 stages, and understanding which stage a city is currently in is the single most important variable in determining whether moving there still makes financial sense. Tier 1 is the already discovered markets. These are the cities that have been on every best places to move list for the past 3 years. Austin, Nashville, Denver, Miami, Boise, Asheville, Scottsdale. They received massive migration waves starting in 2020 and 2021. The arbitrage window, the financial advantage of moving there from an expensive city, is largely or entirely closed. Median home prices in Nashville went up 58% between 2019 and 2023. Austin went up 63%. Boise went up 71% in 4 years. These markets absorbed millions of high-income remote workers who drove up housing prices to levels that make the math much less compelling for the next person arriving. These are still genuinely good cities. The quality of life that attracted people to them in the first place is still real. Job markets are strong. Restaurants and culture and walkability and green space are all there. But if your primary motivation for moving is financial improvement, if you are trying to do what Marcus did, these markets have already priced in the migration. You are not getting the 2021 deal. You are getting the post-wave deal, and the difference is enormous. Tier 2 is the active wave markets. These are cities that are currently receiving significant migration, but have not yet fully priced it into their housing market. The wave is arriving, prices are rising, the competition for housing is real. But the arbitrage, the financial advantage relative to where you are coming from, still exists in a meaningful way. The window is open, but it is narrowing. Raleigh is right at the edge of this tier, moving toward Tier 1, but not quite there yet. Charlotte is solidly here. The Dallas suburbs we mentioned are here. Greenville, South Carolina, which keeps showing up in migration data in ways that surprised even us when we first pulled it, is here. Huntsville, Alabama is here. The Charleston, South Carolina market is here for people who can afford the coastal premium. Are buying a Tier 1 market at 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 a Tier are buying a Tier 1 market at a Tier 1 price, and the financial case for moving is substantially weaker. Tier 3 is the undiscovered markets, and this is where the most interesting analysis is right now. These are markets with genuinely strong fundamentals, solid job growth, real improvements in quality of life infrastructure, attainable housing prices, but they have not yet received a major migration wave. The data is beginning to show early signals. Prices have not moved significantly yet. The crowd has not arrived. Chattanooga, Tennessee, Columbus, Ohio, Kansas City, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Richmond, Virginia, El Paso, Texas, Cincinnati. These are the cities that look, in the data, like Raleigh looked in 2018. The fundamentals are there. The early signals are there. The prices have not caught up yet. The risk of a Tier 3 market is that you are moving somewhere that is not yet on the list. The infrastructure of the already discovered markets is more developed. The professional community that follows migration waves has not fully arrived yet. You are earlier in the cycle, which means more upside, but also more patience required, and more uncertainty about exactly when the wave arrives. The reward is exactly what Jennifer was looking for, and did not find in Asheville, because she arrived after the wave instead of before it. In a Tier 3 market, you get the real arbitrage. The housing that is still priced at local incomes, not at the inflated level that arrives when high-income out-of-state buyers flood in. The community that is building and improving, not one that has already reached peak hype and is now managing the consequences of rapid growth. Now let us talk about how to identify a Tier 3 market before it becomes a Tier 2 market. Because there are always Tier 3 markets somewhere. The question is, which ones have the right combination of fundamentals to actually make the transition? We look at 5 signals. And when all 5 are present simultaneously, the data historically has been highly predictive of the next migration wave. Signal number 1 is job growth outpacing the national average at a rate of at least 2 times the national rate. When a city is adding jobs significantly faster than the country as a whole, 2 things happen. People move there for jobs, which creates organic housing demand, and the economic base strengthens, which reduces the risk that the migration is temporary. The lag between job growth acceleration and price appreciation in housing is typically 18 to 24 months. That is your window. Find the job growth before the housing market has priced it in. Signal number 2 is inbound LinkedIn searches from expensive metros. LinkedIn publishes data on where its users are searching for jobs. When you see a significant increase in job searches within a specific city from users whose current location is San Francisco, New York, Los Angeles, or Seattle, that city is about to receive an affluent migration wave. See, these are high-income professionals doing the exact spreadsheet exercise that Marcus did. They have already identified the city as a target. The housing market has not fully registered their arrival yet. This signal typically leads price movement by 12 to 18 months. Signal number 3 is airport traffic growth, specifically the addition of new direct flight routes from major expensive metros. This one sounds counterintuitive until you think about it. Airlines are extraordinarily data-driven about where they open new routes. They are not guessing. They are following demand that already exists. When a mid-size American city gets a new direct flight from San Francisco, or New York, or Los Angeles, it is because there is already a business case for it. People are already going back and forth. Companies have already established offices or clients there. The infrastructure of connection between the expensive city and the destination city is being formalized. That formalization is a leading indicator of intensifying migration. Signal number 4 is college town adjacency and university research infrastructure. Cities that are adjacent to major research universities, or that have a significant university within their metropolitan area, will consistently outperform on quality-of-life metrics and attract young professional talent in ways that cities without that anchor cannot replicate. The university provides a constant inflow of educated young workers. It anchors a hospital system, which provides healthcare employment that is resistant to economic downturns. It creates a culture of education and intellectual activity that attracts a certain type of resident. And perhaps most practically, it means the city has a built-in pipeline of workers that employers specifically seek out when deciding where to locate. Signal number 5 is rising national restaurant and retail investment. When you see national restaurant chains, particularly the quality tier chains that do rigorous demographic analysis before entering a market, beginning to open locations in a city, and when you see boutique retail operators and independent food and beverage businesses investing in a city's downtown, they have already done the work. They have already analyzed the income demographics, the population growth projections, it's the density trends. They are following wealth concentration that they can see in the data. When Whole Foods opens in a neighborhood, it is not a coincidence. It is a conclusion of a data-driven analysis. Watch where the retail investment is going, and you are watching where the affluent demographic shift is already beginning. Right now, As of the data we are looking at in early 2025, 3 cities are scoring high on all 5 signals simultaneously: Chattanooga, Tennessee; Columbus, Ohio; and El Paso, Texas. Each of them deserves a full deep dive analysis, and we are going to do that. We are going to spend a full video on each of these cities in the coming weeks, going neighborhood by neighborhood, data point by data point, with a clear verdict on whether the opportunity is real. But for today, understand why these 3 specifically. Chattanooga is experiencing job growth at 2.4 times the national average, driven by a manufacturing resurgence in the region and by a technology sector that has been quietly building around the logistics and advanced manufacturing industries. LinkedIn data shows a meaningful increase in searches from Atlanta and from the Charlotte market. Its airport added direct routes from New York and Chicago in 2023. It has the University of Tennessee Chattanooga and a well-regarded hospital system, and its downtown has seen significant restaurant and retail investment over the past 3 years. All 5 signals. Prices have not moved significantly yet. The window is open. Columbus is in the middle of one of the most underreported economic stories in the Midwest. Intel announced a $20 billion semiconductor manufacturing investment in the Columbus area that is in various stages of development. That kind of anchor investment brings thousands of direct jobs and multiplies into tens of thousands of indirect jobs in supporting industries, retail, services, and housing. LinkedIn data shows increasing searches from Chicago and from the coastal tech markets. Housing prices have moved from their 2022 lows, but are still dramatically below what comparable properties cost in Tier 1 or Tier 2 markets. Columbus has Ohio State University, one of the largest research universities in the country, anchoring its labor market and its healthcare infrastructure. All 5 signals present. The wave is early. El Paso surprises people. But look at the data. It has one of the fastest job growth rates of any city in Texas, driven by its position as a logistics and manufacturing hub on the U.S.-Mexico border, by significant military employment at Fort Bliss, and by a healthcare sector anchored by University Medical Center and Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center. Housing prices in El Paso are among the lowest of any city over 300,000 people in the United States, and the LinkedIn signal is just beginning to show up. Airport connectivity is improving, and it has the fundamentals that historically precede a significant migration wave. This is the early stage. The patience required is real, but so is the upside. Now let us talk about what this means for you specifically, because everything we have covered is context, and context without a decision framework is just information. The goal of this channel is not to make you more informed. It is to help you make better decisions. If you are renting in an expensive city and your work is remote compatible, the data is unambiguous. The financial case for moving is stronger right now than it has been in 2 decades. The gap between what you are paying and what you could be paying is at a historic high. Your geographic optionality, your ability to earn a high-income salary while living somewhere significantly cheaper, is a financial advantage that compounds every year you use it and shrinks every year you do not. And this is not a permanent window. Remote work policies are evolving. Companies are pushing back toward hybrid models. The window in which fully remote work is normalized and accepted is narrower than it appeared in 2021 and 2022. The time to make the move, if the financial case applies to your situation, is in the next 12 to 24 months, not the next 5 years. The specific recommendation for renters depends on your risk tolerance and your life situation. If you want a proven market with established community and clear quality of life, the best remaining Tier 2 opportunities are in the Carolinas corridor and in the Southeast, Charlotte, Greenville, Huntsville. The window is 18 to 24 months before these fully price in. If you are willing to be early, if you are comfortable being in a city that is improving rather than a city that has already improved, the Tier 3 markets offer the best combination of financial upside and quality of life trajectory, Chattanooga, Columbus, and El Paso specifically. If you are a buyer looking for a primary residence and you are doing the math on whether to buy now or wait, the question is less about the market and more about the math of your specific situation. Buying in a Tier 1 market at current prices and current interest rates is difficult to justify purely on financial grounds, unless your household income is significantly above the median. The monthly cost of ownership in Austin or Nashville or Denver today, at current prices and current rates, it frequently exceeds the cost of a comparable rental in those same cities. That break-even math has shifted. In Tier 2 markets, the analysis is more nuanced. The appreciation potential is real, the lifestyle improvement is real. But so is the rate sensitivity. If you are buying in a Tier 2 market today, and rates drop significantly over the next 3 years, which many economists expect, your property value is likely to appreciate meaningfully, and your refinancing opportunity would be significant. If rates stay elevated or rise further, the holding costs are harder to justify on purely financial grounds. In Tier 3 markets, the buyer case is the most interesting. You are buying at local income prices in a city that is about to receive high-income out-of-state buyers. Your property is likely to appreciate significantly as the wave arrives. Your cost of ownership is the most manageable relative to your income. The trade-off is that you are moving to a city that is still in the building phase. The amenities are improving but not yet complete. The community you want may still be forming. That trade-off is real and different people will weigh it differently. If you are an investor looking for your next market, the Tier 3 analysis is where the real opportunity is in 2025. Cash flow, which has become genuinely difficult to achieve in Tier 1 markets at current prices and rates, is still attainable in Tier 3 markets. Cap rates in Chattanooga, Columbus, and El Paso are currently running 1.5 to 2 percentage points higher than cap rates on comparable properties in Nashville or Austin. That difference is the entire investment thesis. Over a 5 to 7 year hold, with the migration wave arriving as the signals suggest it will, the combination of cash flow plus appreciation in a Tier 3 market is likely to significantly outperform the appreciation-only play in an already discovered Tier 1 market. The risk to this thesis is timing. Tier 3 markets do not pop in 12 months. The migration wave arrives over years, not quarters. Investors who need near-term valuation increases should look elsewhere. Investors who can hold for a 5 to 7 year horizon and who are comfortable with the cash flow support while they wait for the appreciation, this is the most compelling opportunity in domestic real estate right now. Here is where we land today. Everything we have covered, the 4 drivers of migration, the official data on where people are actually going, the 3-tier framework, the 5 signals, the verdict by viewer type, it all points toward the same conclusion. The window for a Marcus-level financial transformation from moving is still open. It is narrower than it was in 2021 and 2022, and it is narrowing further every year. The cities that deliver the biggest improvement are now 1 tier deeper than they used to be. You cannot make the Raleigh 2020 move anymore because Raleigh 2020 does not exist anymore. But you can make the Chattanooga 2025 move or the Columbus 2025 move or the El Paso 2025 move. And 10 years from now, the people who made those moves are going to look the way Marcus looks today. Like they saw something before everyone else did. Like they did the work and made the call. That is what this channel is for. Every week we are going to take one market or one comparison or one data question, and we are going to go as deep as we need to go to give you a real answer. Not a listicle, not a top 10. A real answer with real data and a real verdict. Next week we are taking on Austin, not the version you have seen recycled in every relocation blog for the past 3 years. The real 2025 Austin. Neighborhood by neighborhood, data point by data point. The parts that work and the parts that are overpriced and the parts that most people looking at Austin never look at because they are looking at the marketed version instead of the actual data. The short answer is that Austin is 3 different cities depending on where you are and what you are trying to do. And most people are looking at the wrong one. That video goes live next week. If this kind of analysis is what you have been looking for, you know what to do. And one last thing before you go. Tell me in the comments which city you are thinking about, or which city you are trying to leave. I read every single comment. And the markets that come up most consistently in those comments are the ones we prioritize for analysis. Your comment is literally programming the next few months of this channel. See you next week. Let me go deeper on something that we touched on but did not fully explore. The psychological dimension of this decision. Because the financial case for leaving an expensive city is compelling, the data makes that clear, but the reason millions of people who know the financial case still have not made the move is not financial, it is psychological. And understanding the psychology is as important as understanding the economics. There is a concept in behavioral economics called loss aversion. The idea that the pain of losing something you already have is roughly twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining something equivalent. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky demonstrated this in their research on how people actually make decisions versus how rational actor economic theory says they should make decisions. And loss aversion is doing a tremendous amount of work in keeping people in expensive cities despite compelling financial reasons to leave. When someone in San Francisco contemplates moving to Raleigh or Chattanooga or Columbus, they are not just making a financial calculation. They are contemplating giving up everything they have already built in the place where they live, their professional network, their social relationships, their sense of identity as someone who lives in San Francisco, their proximity to their current job's office, even if they are technically remote, the restaurants they love, the neighborhoods they know by heart, the version of themselves that exists in that city. These are real things. They are not irrational things to care about. The financial case for moving does not eliminate the genuine cost of leaving. But loss aversion causes people to systematically overweight what they are giving up and systematically underweight what they are gaining. They imagine the worst version of the new city while remembering the best version of their current city. They focus on the specific things they will miss while glossing over the specific things they will gain. They think about the risk of the unknown while habituating to the known costs of staying. The way to break through loss aversion in this decision is to make the losses and gains as concrete and comparable as possible, which is exactly what Marcus did. He did not ask himself whether he would miss San Francisco. Of course, he would miss parts of it. He asked himself whether the specific things he would miss were worth $180,000 over the next 3 years. That is what staying in San Francisco cost him in additional savings, compared to Raleigh over 3 years at the savings differential he calculated. $180,000. When you make the loss concrete, it changes the calculation, because now the question is not vague and emotional. It is specific and financial. Is the comfort of staying in a city you know worth $180,000 to you over the next 3 years? For some people, honestly, the answer is yes, that is a valid answer. But it should be a conscious choice, not a default one driven by inertia and the difficulty of imagining yourself somewhere new. Let me walk you through the full financial model that Marcus actually built, because we have talked around it, but I want to show you the actual structure of the calculation, because this is the calculation you need to build for your own situation. Marcus started with what he called the baseline bleed. That is the amount of money he was losing every year by staying in San Francisco compared to his best alternative. He calculated this by looking at 4 factors. First, in the direct housing cost differential, the difference between what he was paying in San Francisco and what a comparable or better housing situation would cost him in his target city. For Marcus, that was $1,300 a month, $15,600 a year. Second, the tax differential. The difference between California state income tax and North Carolina state income tax at his income level. For Marcus, that was approximately $9,000 a year in additional take-home. Third, the cost of living differential on all other expenses, groceries, transportation, utilities, services. For Marcus, that was another $4,800 a year. Fourth, the opportunity cost of his down payment savings deficit. Every year he stayed in San Francisco and saved $2,000 a month instead of $4,800 a month in Raleigh. He was missing $23,000 that he could have had invested. At a 7% annual return, the compounding cost of that differential over 10 years is enormous. Add those 4 factors together, and Marcus's baseline bleed was over $48,000 a year. That is the annual cost of staying. Every year he delayed the decision. He paid $48,000 for the privilege of continuing to live in San Francisco. Most people do not think about it that way. They think about the cost of moving. They do not calculate the cost of not moving. Now here is the other side of the calculation. Marcus also built what he called the arrival upside. What would be different, financially, in the destination city beyond just the reduced expenses? He looked at property appreciation trends in Raleigh. He modeled what buying a property in Raleigh in 2022 versus waiting until 2024 would likely do to his entry price and his equity position. He looked at the job market in Raleigh and the question of whether staying remote was his only option or whether a hybrid arrangement with the same company from Raleigh was feasible. He looked at investment opportunities that his increased monthly savings would create. The arrival upside in his model was conservatively another $30,000 a year in wealth-building capacity beyond just the expense reduction. Between the baseline bleed he stopped paying and the arrival upside he started capturing, the decision was worth roughly $80,000 a year to Marcus. Every year he delayed was $80,000 he did not build. That is the kind of number that breaks through loss aversion. Because now the question is not whether you will miss your favorite restaurant. The question is whether you are willing to pay $80,000 a year to keep going to your favorite restaurant. Most people are not, but they never frame the question that way. We are going to build a version of this model that you can apply to your own situation in an upcoming video. We are going to walk through the exact calculation, the categories to include, the common mistakes people make in building it, and the specific data sources to use for each variable. That is coming. For today, understand the framework. Your baseline bleed is the annual cost of staying. Your arrival upside is the annual wealth-building advantage of moving. The difference between those two numbers is the real cost of inaction, and it is almost always larger than people think. Now I want to address something directly, something that comes up constantly in the comments on content like this. People say this is all well and good for tech workers making $150,000. What about regular people? What about people who are not earning high salaries? Does the analysis apply to them? The answer is yes, but the math looks different and the strategy looks different. Let me explain. For a household earning $75,000 in New York City or Los Angeles, the financial pressure is not less than it is for Marcus. It is more. At $75,000 in Los Angeles, you are spending a significantly higher percentage of your after-tax income on housing than Marcus was spending in San Francisco. You have less margin, less ability to save, less ability to absorb financial shocks. The case for moving is, if anything, stronger. The difference is in the destination calculus. Marcus was moving with a salary that gave him significant purchasing power in a Tier 2 or Tier 3 market. A household earning $75,000 has less purchasing power and therefore needs to think more carefully about which market makes sense and which job market will support their income going forward. If your work is location dependent, if you cannot take your current job with you, then the relocation decision requires an additional step, the job market analysis. You are not just asking where can I afford to live. You are asking where can I both afford to live and find work at an income that maintains or improves my financial situation. The two questions together change the answer. The cities that come up best in this dual analysis for non-remote workers in the $75,000 income range are primarily the Midwest markets and the Southeast markets where local job markets are genuinely strong. Columbus has a diverse job market across healthcare, technology, finance, logistics, and government. Indianapolis has a strong healthcare and life sciences sector. The Charlotte market has one of the strongest financial services job markets outside of New York. These are not just cheap places to live. They are cities with real economic bases, where the jobs are there for someone willing to build a career. And here is something that often gets overlooked in relocation analysis. The cost of living differential has a larger absolute impact on lower-income households in some ways than on higher ones, because a larger percentage of their income is going to housing and other variable costs. A family spending 60% of their income on housing in Los Angeles who moves to Columbus and immediately drops that to 30% of their income does not just save money. They change their entire financial trajectory. They go from housing insecurity to housing stability. They go from no savings capacity to real savings capacity. They go from one financial shock away from crisis to a position where they can build a buffer. The migration story is often told through the lens of wealthy remote workers, because they are the ones driving the headline numbers and the housing price changes in destination markets. But the underlying case for relocation applies across a much wider range of income levels. The specific math differs, the strategy differs, but the fundamental logic is the same. Now let me add some important nuance to the Tier 3 recommendation. Because moving to a Tier 3 market is not right for everyone, and I want to be honest about the trade-offs. Tier 3 markets are cities in transition. That transition is real, and the direction is positive. But it is a process, not a completed story. When you move to Columbus or Chattanooga or El Paso today, you are moving to a city that is better than it was 5 years ago, and will be better in 5 years than it is today. The trajectory is clear, but the current state is not Nashville in 2023 or Raleigh in 2023. The infrastructure of a well-discovered, fully arrived mid-tier city has not fully materialized yet. Concretely, what does that mean? It means the restaurant scene is good and improving, but does not yet match Nashville's density of quality options. It means the professional social community of remote workers and relocated professionals exists, but is less fully formed than in a Tier 2 market. It means that if you are moving for a specific lifestyle, a walkable urban neighborhood with a high density of cultural amenity, the Tier 3 market requires more patience and more intentionality about building that life than a Tier 2 or Tier 1 market does. For some people, that trade-off is completely worth it. The financial case is compelling, the trajectory of the city is exciting, and being part of building something is more appealing than arriving after it is already built. For others, the lifestyle certainty of a more established market matters enough to justify the higher housing costs. Neither preference is wrong, but both should be conscious choices, not defaults. The way to think about it is this. In a Tier 1 market, you are paying a premium for a lifestyle that is already there. In a Tier 2 market, you are getting a discount relative to Tier 1 while the lifestyle is still strong and proven. In a Tier 3 market, you are buying the trajectory. You are betting on where the city is going, not where it already is. That bet has historically paid off very well for the people who made it at the right time, but it requires a level of patience and a tolerance for being early that not everyone has. One more thing I want to address before we wrap up. The question of whether all of this domestic migration is good. Whether the pattern we are describing, high-income workers leaving expensive cities and moving to lower-cost markets, is a net positive or a net negative for the places involved. The honest answer is that it is complicated, and the answer differs depending on which place you are asking about. For the destination cities, the migration wave brings real benefits. Tax revenue increases, new businesses open, quality restaurants and retail arrive, the labor market diversifies, property values appreciate, which is good for existing homeowners. The city attracts attention and investment that might not have come otherwise, but it also brings real costs. Property values appreciate, which is bad for existing renters and for lower-income residents who are displaced by rising costs. And the character of neighborhoods changes in ways that longtime residents sometimes mourn. The political economy of the city shifts as the new arrivals bring different priorities and voting patterns. Traffic increases, infrastructure gets stressed. The very qualities that made the city attractive, the affordability, the slower pace, the sense of community, can be eroded by the wave that was attracted to them. This is the gentrification dynamic in its large-scale metropolitan form. It is real. It is something that the people making the move and the cities receiving them need to think about honestly. The individual financial case for a move can be compelling while the aggregate social impact is complicated. We are not going to pretend that tension does not exist. It does. And as we cover specific markets on this channel, we are going to talk about it. Because understanding the full picture of a market includes understanding what is happening to the people who were there before the migration wave, not just what happens to the people arriving. That said, the decision of whether to make a financially transformative move for your family is ultimately yours. The systemic issues of housing affordability and displacement require policy solutions at a scale that no individual relocation decision is going to meaningfully affect one way or another. You are not causing or solving the housing crisis by deciding where you live, but you are making one of the most consequential financial decisions of your life, and you deserve an honest, data-driven framework for making it well. That is the commitment of this channel. Honest analysis, real data, clear verdicts. Every market we cover, every comparison we build, every framework we develop, it is in service of helping you make the best possible decision for your own situation, with the clearest possible picture of what the evidence actually says. The framework you have today is the foundation. Tier 1 is bought, Tier 2 is closing. Tier 3 is where the financial opportunity is right now. The 5 signals tell you which Tier 3 markets are closest to the transition. The baseline bleed calculation tells you the annual cost of staying in your current city, and the arrival upside calculation tells you the annual wealth-building advantage of making the move. Build your own model, use the framework, run your own numbers, and come back next week because we are going to apply all of it to the most analyzed real estate market in America, Austin, Texas. And what we find when we go truly data deep on that city is going to change how you think about it in ways you are not expecting. Let me give you something practical that you can use this week. Not next month, not when you feel ready, this week. Because the most common outcome of consuming this kind of analysis is that people feel informed and then do nothing, because the decision still feels too large and too complex to start. So here is the starting point. Step 1 is to calculate your baseline bleed. Take your current monthly rent or mortgage payment and find the equivalent property, same number of bedrooms, a similar quality neighborhood, in 3 cities from our Tier 2 or Tier 3 list. Use Zillow for rental comps or mortgage calculators with current rate assumptions for purchase. Do not average or estimate. Find actual current listings. The difference between your current housing cost and the best alternative is the core of your annual baseline bleed. Step 2 is to calculate your tax differential. Go to a cost of living calculator and compare your current state's income tax rate to your target state's rate at your current income level. Many people are shocked by this number. Californians moving to Texas or Florida or Tennessee are saving an amount in state income taxes that often exceeds the housing cost differential. These are states with no income tax. That zero is significant. Step 3 is to write down, specifically, the 3 things you most value about where you currently live. Not generally, specifically. The Saturday morning farmers market at a specific location, your specific friend group and how often you actually see them. The specific professional community that has been valuable to your career. Make it concrete. Then ask yourself, what would it actually take to replicate or replace each of those 3 things in a new city? This exercise consistently reveals that the things people think are irreplaceable are frequently more portable than they assumed, and that the things holding them back are more often inertia and identity than specific tangible anchors. Step 4 is to identify your single biggest legitimate constraint, not your fears, your constraints. Are you required to be physically present for your work some percentage of the time? Do you have a custody arrangement that limits your geographic range? Do you have a specific healthcare need that requires proximity to a specialized medical facility? Is there a family obligation that requires you to stay within a certain distance? These are real constraints, and they are different from the psychological resistance that loss aversion creates. Identify the real constraint, if there is one, and then design around it. A hybrid work arrangement that requires 2 days a month in San Francisco is not a constraint that requires living in San Francisco. It is a constraint that requires living within 2 hours of a major airport. If you do those 4 steps, you will have more clarity about this decision than 90% of the people who are thinking about it, talking about it, or reading about it without actually moving the numbers. You will know your annual cost of staying. You will know your likely benefit from moving. You will know specifically what you value about where you are. And you will know whether your constraints are real or imagined. Everything after that is execution, and execution is a different video. We will cover it when we get to the specific market analysis for wherever your target city turns out to be. Here is my honest closing thought about what the data shows across all of the research we have done in building this channel and this analysis. The United States is in the middle of the largest geographic reshuffling of population and wealth since the post-war suburban migration of the 1950s and 1960s. The expensive coastal cities are not dying. They are recalibrating. They will remain vital, culturally rich, professionally important places. But they are losing their monopoly on economic opportunity and on the sense that you have to be there to matter professionally and financially. The mid-tier American city is having a moment that is structural, not cyclical. The investment in downtowns, in food and culture, in parks and infrastructure, in the quality of life that makes a city worth living in beyond just the economic opportunity it provides. This has been ongoing for 20 years and is now visible at a scale that was not true a decade ago. Chattanooga is genuinely good. Columbus is